All right, gang. Welcome to the final Omohundro Institute Digital Humanities Coffee House session of this term. Thanks very much for joining us on this grand tour of digital projects over the last few months. I'm Jim Ambuske of George Mason University, joined as always by my co-host Martha Howard, who keeps the ship running uh, at the OI and all things everywhere all the time. We are delighted to conclude this season of our digital coffee house coming off of Memorial Day with an important new initiative at the Museum of the American Revolution called the Patriots of Color Archive. And thank you very much to all of you for joining us here over the last several months as we've talked about some amazing digital projects. And hopefully we'll be back in the fall. And so if you've got a digital project you'd like to talk about, do let us know. So, without further ado, I'll get out of the way and introduce my colleagues, Adrienne Whaley and Cade, excuse me, from the Museum of the American Revolution. Uh, Adrienne is an educator and history lover, both excellent qualities, who currently serves as the Director of Education and Community Engagement at the Museum of the American Revolution with a bachelor's degree in African American Studies from Harvard University and a master's in education from the University of Pennsylvania. And Cade is the assistant curator at the Museum of the American Revolution and currently a PhD candidate in the history of the American civilization at the University of Delaware, looking at music, tourism, and sensory expressions of nationalism in the 19th century. So I'm very delighted to welcome you to the floor today and excited to hear about this project.
Well, thank you all so much for allowing us to be on this show. We're really excited to talk about this project, and we are deep in the thick of things right now. We're here to talk with you all about this project that's been quite a while in the making and is so exciting. Our Patriots of Color Archive online interactive. This is a multi-part project, and I'm really going to let Allie dig into like the what of it as we go through the course of this presentation. But let me just start by telling you all a little bit about our museum in case you don't know who we are. So, the Museum of the American Revolution is a pretty much brand new museum located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We just opened to the public in April of 2017. So, we just celebrated our 8th anniversary earlier this year. Our mission is to uncover and share compelling stories about the diverse people and the complex events that sparked America's ongoing experiments in liberty, equality, and self government. Our vision is to ensure that the promise of the American Revolution endures. And so, this project, the Patriots of Color Archive, and the online interactive that is going to come out of it is really a part of helping us to do what we've been trying to do since the beginning, which is tell these compelling stories, which is lift up the experiences of these diverse people and show that they were going through complex circumstances themselves and show sort of how their lives interacted with the larger story of the ongoing American Revolution. So, Allie, I'm going to turn it over to you for the first part and just tell me when to go to the next slide.
Sure, thank you. So how did we get this collection? This came from a private collection. It was a museum purchase in 2021 with the support of a number of donors. It consists of 250, two or three documents, and growing if we're able to add to it. And the types of documents that are included are quite varied and include things like pay vouchers, muster rolls, enlistment documents, and discharge papers, among many other things. The pieces that I have on display right here on the screen sort of shows a nice range of what we have. So there's a receipt of blankets for a man named Cipher Negro and another one named Newport Negro who served in the Connecticut line. There's a pay voucher, Mr. Peter Lyon, for his service in the Connecticut line. There's a pay list for the Second Connecticut Regiment with a number of Black and Indigenous soldiers. And then finally, there's an enlistment record for a man named Tom who was enslaved in Connecticut by a man named Beriah Brown. So we have quite a wide variety of the actual materials, and there's so many different directions we can take them from an interpretive standpoint. So this whole collection went onto Ancestry in September 2023. So it's currently accessible for everyone to go explore it. You can search it by metrics like names and dates, rank, regiment, location. And you can also just browse the collection. I often like to just browse it because you really get to not every little bit of it is cataloged, so that's actually on the each paper. So getting to just peruse the materials and really read them is a nice immersive experience. So yeah, I mean, each record then has its own page, corresponding with the individual that it is speaking about. And of course, Ancestry helpfully often puts like related enlistment records and muster rolls, etc., sort of on the side. So it kind of plops it into this already extant network of Black and Indigenous soldiers that already exist on the records on Ancestry.
So we put this material up on Ancestry and we felt really good about that. It is exciting to have this material searchable and available to lots of folks. But the question really was, what's next? Like accessibility, it can be looked at through a variety of different lenses. And for a lot of people, just having access to a database is not really enough to help folks to understand the stories of these people and to try to understand better the fullness of their lives. And that's something that we really try to do here at the museum is engage in storytelling. It's not just about presenting like, here's an object or here is a date. There was this important battle that took place, but like, why does this matter in real people's lives? So that's what we wanted to dig into with this archive. And one of the first questions we had to ask ourselves was, who is the audience for this? And the very first thing that came to mind was students and teachers. Now, obviously, there's other audiences that we want to make all of this available to as well, right? Like just your general digital explorers, for example, your adults who have a love of understanding stories from the revolution, et cetera, et cetera. But what we have heard from teachers quite often is that they want access to all of the resources that we have. They want their students to be able to access them, not only in their school classrooms, but also at home. And one of the reasons that these stories were so exciting for them is because they were about soldiers of African and Indigenous ancestry. And one of the reasons that we knew that this would be interesting for them in advance is because we actually already had another resource that was available in our galleries that teachers told us, hey, you should put this online. That was called Finding Freedom. And what you see in this picture here is an image from one of our galleries that focuses on the war in the South, and specifically both this tableau as well as the case behind it and the screens that are in between are all focused on Virginia in 1781. And what you see on the screens, and I'll show you, we'll go forward in these slides and you'll get to see there are about 5 people of African descent who were all living and working in Virginia in 1781, but all have different life experiences. And what we really wanted to lift up is of the approximately 500,000 people of African descent who were living in British North America on the eve of the American Revolution, around 200,000 of them are in Virginia alone. And of those people, they are not all having identical experiences. Finding Freedom allowed us to dig into that by focusing on the stories of 5 of them. So the image you can see highlighted right now is Jack, but we also have a woman named Deborah, or actually a young lady named Deborah. She's about 16 years old. She's living at George Washington's Mount Vernon. We have someone named Andrew who's living in Botetourt County. We have someone named Eve who is living at Williamsburg. And we have someone named London whose exact location I'm forgetting, but he is a part of the sort of household and community of Robert Pleasance. So here's what we did with this. We decided to take each of the stories and build out a sort of a storybook experience online and in our galleries, but we enhanced the version online and released this to students and teachers and the public about 2 or 3 years ago at this point. So there's about 8 to 10 scenes for each of these individuals. We did research on their lives, pulling from a bunch of different primary source documents, and also looking at contextual information, secondary sources, looking at objects that come from the area or maybe from the military group that they might have been a part of or the community that they lived within, et cetera, to build out their stories. For each of the scenes, we put together sort of speculative first person language based on all of the research. We embedded hotspots. You can see these two eyes right here for more information. For the online version, we also created sort of an easier version to access if you're on your phone or a tablet or something like that. And basically, we walk through each person's story. For each of the people, there is a decision making point, just one, in finding freedom, where you, as the person who is going through the story, trying to understand their life, are sort of faced with this question of what would you do in this circumstance? But coming from the first person of the person who is telling the story. So, for example, here, Jack is trying to decide whether he should try to join the British or whether he should stay in his community and fight for his freedom and his liberty at home. And you can see that he is presenting are the potential outcomes depending on which decision I make. And then the person going through the story gets to select, okay, well, I would go or I would stay. And then you get to sort of hear from Jack, you chose to do this, but Jack chose to do this, or you chose to do this and Jack also made this decision. And then you get to hear the rest of the story. One other thing that I want to lift up about the storytelling here is that for each of these individuals, there is an area in the upper right hand corner where we lift up two things. Number one, a how do we know section. And number two, a timeline. So let's just lean into that for a second. So, for the how do we know, one of the things that's important for us as an institution is to show our work. So, if you all are familiar with some of the research around museums, you know that museums are one of the most highly trusted institutions in American society. And we want to maintain that trust. And so, we think that part of the way that you do that is by telling people how you come to your conclusions and how you do the work that you do. So you can see for lifting up how we know what we know about Jack, we explicitly say he didn't leave a diary, he didn't leave a memoir. We don't have a first person account from him exploring his story. So we dramatized it based on other people's records. And so we explain that, and then we actually provide an example of one of the primary sources that we use in the actual interactive. And you can enlarge it and you could read a transcription of it. And then I'll tell you now that we've also built out teacher resources and resources for students that include all of the primary sources that we got permission to put online. And they're transcribed so that anybody can take a look at the full set and actually ask themselves, well, do I think that they told this story correctly? Do I think that they came to the right conclusions about this person's life? The other thing I wanted to lift up is that there's a timeline area where you can actually see like a list of things that are happening in the lives of people of African descent in general in the colonies and specifically in Virginia. And then you can see each of our five individuals' stories sort of placed on top of that. Now, that's not what you're looking at on the screen right now. You're actually looking at something cool that we created to support that. So if you click out of that section, the timeline area, you can select a map that will actually take you to a custom Google map that we designed so that you can see all five of the individuals whose stories we're exploring and the different places we're able to place them over the course of their lives during this period based on the primary source documents and in some cases secondary documents that sort of lift up the stories of the groups or organizations that they were with so that you can see a little bit sort of either how local their stories are or how much they're able to move around, which I think is pretty cool. And because this is a Google map with multiple layers, you can actually like unselect like Deborah and Eve and Andrew and London and just see Jack. You can focus on two people to see how their stories may have overlapped and so on and so forth. So How did we decide to create this resource the way that we did? We did a bunch of audience research. So early on, back in 2017, 2018, we actually conducted a project just to understand overall what sorts of digital resources were available for educators, generally speaking, in the history space, but also specifically in the colonial and revolutionary era space. We looked at a bunch of different people's resources, sort of what were the things that they were creating, what sorts of supports were they creating to go around them for their students, and so on and so forth. Then we also worked with teachers during a couple of summer teacher institutes, as well as teacher mixers and receptions and things like that, to conduct on site observations. So we actually had some of our staff with clipboards with like a checklist of things that we were looking for and with like a clicker to see how much time people were spending doing different things. And we watched the people go through these stories to see like what was interesting, what were they sticking on, et cetera, et cetera. And then we had conversations with folks. What did you find most interesting about this? How would you want to use this in your classroom? We held focus groups. We did a survey with a bunch of teachers on our email list. And then we worked over the course of the development of this project for Finding Freedom, in particular, as well as with some of the other digital resources that we have also created since that time, to actually get their feedback at multiple stages in the process. So, why are we talking about all of this related to Finding Freedom? Because we're going to do basically what we did for Finding Freedom for the Patriots of Color Archive online interactive. We're taking all of the lessons that we learned from Finding Freedom and we are going to apply them to the online interactive for Patriots of Color. But we're also going to add a couple of things. So we heard from teachers that they wanted additional decision points. So instead of having one per story, we're going to have two per story. They also told us that they wanted audio added to these stories, both for students for whom that might just provide more interest, but also for students who are less skilled at reading, who have sort of lower literacy levels. Having the audio is going to help them to better appreciate both the language on screen and the overall story that's being told. So you might have noticed on some of the previous slides for Jack's story that there was like a little speaker icon. That's because earlier this summer, we actually embedded audio working with actors from Virginia, since these were Virginia stories, in order to get that sort of first person, truly dynamic storytelling built in. And so we'll do the same thing working with New England voice actors coming from Connecticut, from Massachusetts, from Rhode Island, based on the stories that we have selected, and representing both African ancestry and Native ancestry so that those voices are as authentic as we can get them for this project. In the original Finding Freedom, we had 5 people. We're adding 2 more for Patriots of Color Archive, so there'd be a total of 7 people. And then one of the other things that teachers told us is that they would love Spanish language resources. And so we are looking at how we can do that for the entire Patriots of Color resource, and some of the select teacher resources materials that will support that. So, how have we done so far with I had a slide for this. So how have we done so far with all of this? Well, within about the first year and a half, we had over 500,000 people accessing Finding Freedom. We're anticipating similar success with the Patriots of Color Archive, and we know that our numbers have already gone up higher than that for Finding Freedom. We are going to do a big push up in New England to make sure that not only do school teachers and administrators know about this project, but we are also going to be reaching out to librarians, to folks at colleges and universities. We've already been accepted to a conference up in Connecticut to talk about this project. So we're really going to work to get the word out about this so that this can get as much lift, as many eyes on it as possible, as much attention as possible. So that again, it's not just like a stack of interesting papers that like you're searching to find out, okay, well, I'm looking for this one name, but that we're actually able to build out the fullness of these stories to really help us to serve our mission as an institution.
So yeah, I mean, like Adrienne said, there's so many incredible opportunities that we have to tell these stories by really focusing on these individuals and bringing them to life in a way that you simply can't just by, glancing at something in the archive or seeing something on the wall in an exhibit. So it's a really exciting project to be part of, and I know we're all really enjoying it. But I want to note that we are still very much in the research and content creation portion of this project. We are in the midst. So we out of the 252 documents, you might be asking, how did we pick these 7 people? Well, we worked with a few consulting historians to select 7 individuals from this collection. And then with those in hand, we had determined about 8 scenes that illustrated various parts of their lives based on the documentary evidence as much as we know. And this really varied. For some individuals, we only know about their lives during wartime, like Anthony Griffin on the screen here. For others, we know that they lived far beyond the war, and we were able to trace latter parts of their lives where the war is that's just a blip. I mean, there's decades afterwards that they're living their lives. So we were able to find land and property records, descendants, probate inventories, which obviously allows us to illustrate the later part of their lives in a different way than maybe some of the other individuals. But so it really varies. But to make this then all sort of packageable for the illustrators that we're working with, I've been working with another wonderful consulting historian, Cade Egner Gruber, to help build out these selected moments and then turn them into storyboards where we've fleshed out the scenes just through writing and brought them to life. Just a lot of, description. And we pair these really detailed scene descriptions with visual references, often period portraiture, landscapes, historic photographs, and all the relevant material culture that we can find, all to aid the illustrators in sort of transferring the ideas that we have in our heads to what they are going to create on the page. Um, and it's a really amazing process to see that come to life. I'll show you some examples of some of these illustrations with one of the first stories that we worked on. A man named Anthony Griffin, which you can see here on this account of payment to some other men in the Rhode Island Regiment, in which Anthony was a private. Anthony, a little backstory for him, he was enslaved by a man in northern Maryland named Luke Griffith. And he self-emancipated in August of 1777 when Howe's Armada landed at the head of Elk. And then he, at that point, joined up with the British Army. Perhaps he had heard about the Dunmore Proclamation and felt that that applied to him, and then went with the British Army to Philadelphia during its occupation. At some point that winter, however, Anthony decided to leave British occupied Philadelphia and instead join up with the Continental Army wintering at Valley Forge. So he enlisted at that point as part of the Rhode Island Regiment, which, due to the Slave Enlistment Act passed by the Rhode Island General Assembly in February 1778, it promised manumission to enslaved men and thus had a high concentration of Black soldiers, over 50% in that regiment. We were Black or Indigenous. So Anthony remained within the regiment through 1781, marching southwards to Yorktown, when then he was re-enslaved by Luke Griffith as the regiment was marching through Elkton. So it's a really devastating end to his story. But we're able to tell it and bring light. So I'm excited to show you some of these preliminary sketches for Anthony, and just to know you will actually be the first really to see any of these outside of our immediate team. So it's an exciting moment. So this scene is depicting the moment before Anthony has joined up with the British Army. So it is a scene of enslavement in Maryland. It's high summer. We know that it was like a very rainy, very hot time in that particular month in August 77. So we see Anthony walking out of a grist mill. We weren't able to find exactly Luke Griffith's property. We know he was enslaving Anthony, but he wasn't a wealthy enough property owner to have major holdings in that part of Maryland. So some of this was just deciding, what kind of industries were being used and worked in Maryland at that time, like what would have been realistic for Anthony to potentially be doing and what his enslaver, could have had. So we went with a mill. Um, so he's just shown pushing a sack of ground corn. We have some other enslaved laborers in the background, someone with a hose, some people talking. Um, and so Anthony, then of course we have the textiles is an important part. So we have him just wearing, a loose linen shirt, sleeves rolled up, cream colored breeches. So just to sort of create the setting for what Anthony is where he starts in this story. And the idea also when this has some color to it, is kind of getting that hazy look, and then being able to see just a little bit of the Elk River in the background. And what you can see on the screen here is sort of just a little example of the type of storyboard that we make. And we include usually a few pictures alongside the text, but then we have many more photos available for the illustrators to work with. So that's just sort of like a little summary. So at this point, we are showing the moment that Anthony or it's actually a very liminal moment where Anthony has not yet reached the British, but he has self-emancipated. So he's in that in-between spot. There's some edits we're gonna make, but he ultimately will be looking out at the armada that is sitting in the river there. But you can see he looks like he's on the run. He has his market wallet and he's ready to go down there and join up with the British forces. So Howe's armada is well depicted in this. Thousands and thousands of people arriving on the shores of the river, which would undoubtedly have been quite the scene. So trying to get that sort of sublime shock factor in there as well. But this will also be sort of a nighttime or like early morning scene. So the color, it comes back to seeing what this will look like with color because we want to make sure it's visible that you can see that these are indeed red coats and everything, but it is sort of an early dawn time, so it's kind of dark and maybe Anthony had left in the middle of the night, so it's just becoming sunrise. Um, so that is the second scene that we're working with. And these are just some of the other images that we sent along to create the image that you see on screen. So, the right uniforms, the right look for a market wallet, what it looks like from that part of the Elk River, like what the shoreline views. So, and then a historic print of or watercolor of the Howe's Armada landing. So kind of just having a big combination of both contemporary and historical sources. So at this point, Anthony is in Philadelphia. We are showing him working along the docks with some members of the British Navy. He's working on the oxen cart. So Adrienne, are you able to put your mouse on Anthony? Yeah, there he is. So we know this is a winter scene now, so everyone is dressed a lot more warmly, and we're gonna make sure it looks like, a sort of a drab Philadelphia winter with some snow and overcast skies. But this is a scene where we're really able to bring to life a little bit more of like a community and other people besides some soldiers landing on the shore. We're able to have some women and children that are going to be put into this scene. And we've obviously also changed locations. So now we're in a much more urban space than the shores of Northern Maryland. So this is the scene where he has left Philadelphia and he's walking towards Valley Forge. This is sort of a well-known spot in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, en route to Valley Forge between Philadelphia that still exists. You can drive right under this hanging rock. There's some nice historic photographs of this, so we're able to. I think they really brought this one to life really well. But so it's sort of the same time of year, of course, because it's still the winter. Maybe it's the new year, and he is now heading towards Valley Forge, and he's looking back. It's sort of hard to see maybe in this screen, but he is looking back at us as the viewer instead of looking forward to his new life. But um, just sort of some introspective moments as well. Um, so yeah, there's a Valley Forge scene, and then there's another scene where he is in about Newport, Rhode Island, with his regiment in about 1780. But I've just skipped ahead here to the point where the regiment is now walking towards Yorktown at 1781. They're going through Philadelphia. It's a very bombastic day. It's a really exciting day for everyone in the city. As you can see, there's all sorts of people watching this regiment march through. And we're gonna add more people kind of like hanging out windows, and just everyone wants to see all the regiments marching towards Yorktown. So Anthony is going to be one of the people that you see in the front here. He is wearing what becomes the sort of famous Rhode Island regiment uniform, which they get in 1779, I believe. That has the famous sort of hat with the anchor on it. So it's a really proud moment for Anthony, and he's with his regiment. He's so excited to be, marching together with everyone that he's working with. And we also were able to then sort of cross-reference that with what's going on in 18th century Philadelphia on the urban landscape at that time, looking at some maps and historic prints to make sure buildings are correct. This is the scene where Anthony is re-enslaved. It's obviously a very difficult scene, and a scene that we're especially sensitive to. We are gonna sort of change it up a bit, where Anthony's being handed his discharge papers in this particular iteration, but we're changing that so that will be the papers will be handed to his enslaver. We have the regiment marching along. We're gonna have some people sort of turned around to be looking at him. They will be putting in the flag of the first Rhode Island or the second Rhode Island, which still exists. You can see that at the bottom corner here. We also have a house that is an 18th century structure in Elkton, Maryland, that still stands. But then sort of symbolically, we have Anthony's hat. The Rhode Island hat has fallen to the ground. And we weren't sure if we wanted to show him at first, maybe back on Luke Griffith's farm, but I think that sort of this moment is particularly powerful and devastating. So that is unfortunately where Anthony's story ends, but we have some other individuals that have much happier endings, where they're surrounded by their grandchildren telling their stories, and with their families, with the lives that they created after the war. Unfortunately, we don't know anything else about Anthony after this point. So that is where it ends for him. But throughout this process, if you want to move to the next slide, we've been having joint curatorial education meetings all the time to get feedback on the scope and the content of these projected scenes, and to also ensure that they will be of the most use to their primary audience, which is school-aged children. So then the next stages for this, we have these outlines, but then we're going to be expanding them into the script writing, which you saw with the Finding Freedom Interactive, and then some hot spots. So like those like little details that people can look a little bit more into. So we've selected two, sometimes three for each scene, for each person throughout the entire series. So we try to cover have a really wide range of coverage of like the extra information that is in there that people might want to know. And that's sort of my end of the involvement, but then the project moves on to more teacher resources, as Adrienne had said, and then marketing and communications. We'll get into this a lot. We have the lineup opportunities for speaking with teachers and librarians, and then also being able to do more community engagement. Some of these people, since we know we know descendants, we know important locations in their lives, and being able to actually connect these stories and bring them back to life for people that are currently involved with places or it's their family. I mean, that just makes this project all that more meaningful and important to be doing. So that is sort of a quick overview of what's going on.
Well, that was a terrific presentation. Thank you. I'm trying to figure out what to ask you because you've answered a lot of my questions, and then it's a very multifaceted project. Uh, but let me start here, though, as people are thinking about their own questions. I was really struck by your discussion of finding freedom, but also Anthony's story about the ways in which it seems like you're playing with the word patriot. Can you tell us a little bit about, or talk to us a little bit about your thinking about uh, what patriot or patriotism means from this context? I mean, you could easily think about the British thinking about, certain individuals as being patriots as they would have understood it, but so oftentimes that word is and was co-opted by the rebels. And so, how are you thinking about this sort of wider story?
That's a really good question, and actually is something that we have tried to be really conscious of. Actually, for all of the language that we're using, we even have sort of a style guide for how we talk about the revolution here at the museum. And to your point, we try to be really careful about when and how we use the word patriot. So, actually, oftentimes you will hear us say American or revolutionary, because we recognize that for many people, being a patriot at this time period actually meant that you were supporting the British side of this conflict. You will find that there are cases where we use language that maybe that would not be used in the present day, but would have been acceptable in the past. Not to the point of being like a slur or anything along those lines, but for example, you'll see that sometimes we use the word master when today we might say something like slave owner or enslaver, because we're thinking about what the person in that time would have said from their own mouth at that point in time, and then we draw certain lines when it comes to like safety and respect for the in the present day and how we use that language. But yeah, we try to be careful and thoughtful about what we say and when and how we use it.
Yeah, I think Anthony's story is an interesting sort of counterpoint to that, where he initially goes to the British side and then changes. We can't know exactly why, but something prompted him to make that change. And I think it just goes back to the fact that during the revolution, people are following what their best interests are, and people often lump everything into these black and white categories, patriot, loyalists, etc., where obviously, as we all know, that could not be farther from the truth. And people are doing what they need to do to survive, to find what freedom means for them. So it allows us to sort of get into that complicated narrative, I think, in an accessible way.
That's actually why the original interactive is called Finding Freedom, right? It's not so much about like which side are they supporting. It's actually about what is the thing that they are most deeply looking for themselves, their families, and their communities. And that is freedom, that is agency, that is self determination. It's those things, as opposed to necessarily wanting to support the British because they believe ideologically that the British are correct, or wanting to support the revolutionaries because they believe in that set of ideals. And you'll find in Fighting Freedom and in Patriots of Color that people are making different decisions and sometimes are changing their decisions partway through.
Yeah, I love how it gets sort of the messy process of revolution. As you say, it's not just one side or the other, but people are trying to make choices in their best interest, and some are joining up, or some are just trying to stay the hell out of the way, which is an equally fascinating thing as well. So you've got 250 documents, which is a magnificent collection. And thank you on behalf of whoever donated that, or for donating that collection. That's great. And I've started to think about collaborative collections. And Library of Congress has some pay vouchers from the Connecticut regiments, and what else. Is there interest in, you know, getting the core of this collection set and the interpretive and teaching materials developed, and then beginning possibly expansions with other institutions?
As far as I know, I mean, I think it would be wonderful as much as we're able to add to this collection and interact and work with other institutions that have similar materials. I think we're all for more interactives across the board here. So
We often reference other institutions' materials in our student and teacher resources. So, when there are complementary things that are out there in the world, when there are things that help to tell the story that we're trying to tell, we will point people towards them if they're trusted institutions, right? You know, the Library of Congress and Colonial Williamsburg and Mount Vernon and the National Archives and all of these places, because you can't tell the story with the materials just in one place's collection. And we want teachers to be able to have access to all of the things. And so, for a lot of the materials that we put online for the Finding Freedom, in fact, basically all of the materials we put online for the Finding Freedom Interactive, we got permission from other institutions to put them up on our website. And we credit them so that teachers know where they came from. And in the activities that we've created for teachers, which include like thematic essays on 8 different topics, and then modular activities for 5 minutes in the classroom, 15 minutes in the classroom, an entire class period, or like a 2 week research period, plus worksheets and high quality images and all sorts of things like that. We sometimes will say, take a look at this thing on our website and compare it to this thing on someone else's website. And like that is the activity, so that we're pointing people out as well as to the resources we want people to see on our site.
Can I ask a little bit about the relationship with the teachers? I see some colleagues of ours who work in this space as well, and I'm really interested about the feedback process, the testing, the dialogue you had with educators about what was working, what was not working. How did you each put each other through your paces so that you could hone in on what works and what doesn't?
Yeah. So we started off back in like 2017, 2018, thereabouts, with a pretty broad sort of scan of the landscape of teacher resources that were available online and what was interactive and what wasn't, and how were people creating things for different age groups and et cetera, et cetera. And then as we took a look at the resources that we had that we kind of knew we wanted to make more accessible outside of our building, because we've got a couple of things that existed only in our galleries, which meant you could only access them, like from 10 until 5. You had to be in Philadelphia to see them. We knew that these were good and that they would be useful for teachers, but we needed to get them online, and we needed to get them online in the right way with the right supports. And so that's when those focus groups, those observations, those surveys, and all of that came to play, so that we could figure out not only what teachers were telling us, but what they were showing us with their behavior. And we asked them to tell us, like, what other places, resources do you use, and how do you use them, and all of that. And then when we started to develop the first resources we put online, which included Finding Freedom and another one called Season of Independence, we would show like some of the early work to the teachers and then get their feedback on that. We would ask them specific questions. We'd also ask them, is there anything else you want us to know? And then we would take that and share that with our tech folks and the outside contractors that we worked with to help us build those areas of our website, so that teacher voices really were included throughout. And actually, for our most recent teacher resource that we put online, which is for our multimedia timeline of the American Revolution, we did a summative evaluation where we actually had teachers use the material in their classrooms and then report back to us on like how they were using them. They collected information from their students so that we could better understand like that actual stage of the process. And that's been great. And then we also encourage teachers. It's on the web pages for each of these resources. If you use this in your classroom, if students create work based on it, share it with us. And so every now and then we'll get an email that has like 30 different versions of student artwork that were created based off of a project or something along those lines. And those are the best things. They really are exciting, and they also warm our hearts because it's just adorable to see sometimes littles and sometimes older students like really thinking through and interacting with the ideas and the stories in these resources.
I got a couple of follow-up questions, but I'll save them for a second because Janine has a question about the long-term maintenance of these stories. Have you built in a system to revisit the stories and how the museum plans to keep up with any new information that may change how the story is told as new research or ways of thinking of these complex circumstances change? And notes that I am currently writing an essay about Black soldiers in the Rev War for an online project.
Ooh, okay. That is an excellent question. And for part of it, I'll throw it over to Allie. But what I will say is that we actually, when we were working on Finding Freedom, which had already been built, it was already up on our website. There were a couple of things where we were just like, but surely there's more information. Like, surely we can probably answer this question. And for one of them, we reached out to one of our research friends, and lo and behold, he reached out to one of his research people. They dug a little bit more deeply and they were able to find out the end of one of the stories that we had. And the tech that we have online, actually, we sort of were able to build that in to the story. And what we have on our website is more flexible in some ways than what we have in the galleries. And so you can actually find more of that story on our website than you can find in the in gallery interactive. And so, changing the in gallery one goes sort of on the ongoing punch list of like, we need to change this, we need to update this, we need to fix that. And we will get to that as soon as we have the wherewithal.
Just that the obviously beauty benefits of using an online resources that we're able to make any changes, eventually if needed be, especially if it's something that's major that would sort of change the outcome of a story or the end of a story, for instance. And I know, I mean, as Adrienne mentioned, we added the sound to the Finding Freedom that wasn't there before. So we are still sort of making edits and changes a little bit over time. I mean, of course, the goal is that the content, the core of the content is solid and doesn't, well, hopefully won't need to be changed. I mean, I am still hoping that we will find the end or learn more about Anthony after he was re-enslaved. That would be wonderful. And if that comes in 10 years, then we will make that change. But I think as as we keep doing these projects at the museum, we are learning more, as Adrienne already described. We are taking the changes or the things that we learned from doing Finding Freedom and immediately implementing that into the Patriots of Color Archive as we are just building it right away. So I think it's sort of a long-term learning process, especially on our end, on just how we want to engage with these materials and present them to the public.
I'll be honest, this is one of the challenges of working in a museum. We are constantly creating new special exhibitions, which come with their whole process that involves everybody on staff switching topics from the last thing that we worked on. Right now, we have an exhibit up in our galleries, our special exhibition. We also have our core galleries. We are working on our semi-quincentennial exhibition, which is going to open in October of this year. And we're also actually already working on the exhibit that's going to open after that in 2027. So we're working on each of these things while also still carrying like a deep love for all of the things that we did before. And so, e- especially on the curatorial and education teams, like, you got a free 20 minutes. Let me just go on like whatever website and just see, is there like a new document about this person? Maybe there's like a new record someplace, because you want to find the stories. And that is what's so frustrating about researching. And many of you all will know this, especially researching people who are of color, researching women, researching people who are poor, is that oftentimes you don't have the fullness of their story. It begins somewhere random and it ends somewhere random. And so we always want to find out more about the edges and flesh out the middle. Do we have time? Not always, but it is an ongoing process.
And Smart Martin.
Well, hi. Boy, what a terrific project. And my question for you is often is sort of logistics. And what I've heard is so many voices of energy and synergy of historians and material culture people and clothing experts. And I believe I saw archaeological material tucked in somewhere. The educators, the artists, the tech team. So how have you managed to successfully bring all of these people together into a system by which you can navigate differences of opinion, but also keep a vision? So if you have a secret, we'd love to know.
I think the secret is just regularly scheduled meetings.
Regularly scheduled meetings and mutual respect, I think.
Mhm. Absolutely.
This isn't the first project that we've done that's been complicated. And so I think we get better at the process each time. We're not perfect. We're nowhere near perfect. We are constantly working out kinks in the process, but we respect each other and assume positive intent, I think, all of the time.
So you have working meetings as well as meetings that present research. Do you have meetings where you get with the artist? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm so blown away by how much interaction you have with so many specialty voices.
So a lot of the work that it was just about picking the Patriots of Color out of the larger grouping, that was all over a year ago. But the part that I came in on after it was already selected, so the way that I've been doing it is I'm writing the scripts and writing
Okay.
the storyboards and working with Cade Egner-Gruber to
Yeah.
build those out and get the images in, like I was mentioning. But so then we take that, and then we have had a meeting with all of our education people and the rest, some of the other curatorial team as well, that where we just literally go through like scene by scene and ask if anyone has any thoughts or comments or feels like something's missing or whatnot. And then, as I mentioned, we also have those hot spots, the little
Um,
sort of detailed deep dives per scene. So then we also are checking in on that. Like, do we like those hot spots? Is something else better? Like, what would the students find more interesting? So we really just go like literally scene by scene. So that's the on the very granular level how that's been happening. But then as we've been starting to get the illustrations back,
mhm.
those are separate meetings now, where we just talk about, again, scene by scene of what is going on in this illustration, like and everyone has, something they might feel like needs to be slightly changed, or, these breaches don't look right or whatnot.
Right, there you
Um,
are.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really just everyone is like in this process from start to finish, at least on this end of just creating the raw material for the project. So it's nice because we don't have to play so much catch up or anything in between. Like everyone's there. They all have the materials. They all have been there through from the beginning. So yeah, it's really just really going through as a group. Usually it takes like about 2 hours to do an hour and a half to go through each person, each 8 scene packet. So that's sort of been about what the time that we've spent on it in our meetings. So does that answer your question? I mean, that's just like on the very
No,
literal
no, I mean,
level, like
I
okay.
think a lot of us, and Jim and I are working on it right now. A lot of us are working to be able to bring together more and more concretely
Yeah.
disparate sources and information. And it's nice to see to think about how you have successfully done so
Mhm.
as because I think so many of us are doing or trying to do something like this. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And I'll throw in a couple of other points because this project is it's grant funded and it's got a couple of supporters in the world. So we actually had to have like a pretty clear plan a while ago for what we were
Right.
going to do. So that helped as we've been going through this process. And we also had like a kickoff meeting where everybody who was a part of that process was a part of it. Because I do want to acknowledge that while curatorial and education and some of our outside researchers in particular have been involved in these regular meetings, the web developer who is on our staff is not in those meetings because she doesn't need to be in those meetings because they're content focused. However, like when a question comes up about like this is the aspect ratio of the images that the artist has been creating, are these right for our website? That has been going to the web person via email so that they can confirm, actually, we need to change this a little bit. So can you pass that back over to the illustrator? So we're also trying to be conscious of different people's times and the ways in which they do and do not need to be a part of each conversation.
Well, thank you.
It's a massive team effort, like on a
Yeah.
huge scale, and with all the external people too. So it's certainly sort of an orchestra to conduct to get it together. But we've been, I feel like, pretty successful at it so far.
So far.
No, historians have been left on the battlefield.
Well, as you're tuning up the orchestra, we're excited for the symphony. What's next for the project in our closing moments?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to say, Allie?
Yeah, well, I mean, just as we're getting through the rest of the individuals, we're just getting the sketches back on like the very that's the closest thing that we're working on currently. But I know long term, I don't want to steal your thunder, Adrienne, about the potential book
Yeah. So
situation.
this project is going to debut to the public in the early summer of next year. The grant closes towards the end of the year. So we're going to put it out in the world so that we can do some testing and learn about how it's working, et cetera, et cetera. But the new thing that we're doing that's really different, well, number one, you all heard me mention Spanish language resources and figuring out what that might look like for our English as a second language folks whose primary language is Spanish. But the other thing that we wrote into this grant application, something we've never done before, is we're actually going to publish a children's book with at least one of the, or I'll say a youth book, not for children. The audience we've geared this for is grade 7 and above. But we're going to release some form of a youth book that helps us to tell at least one of the stories that are in the Patriots of Color Archive. We've never done it before, going to be a learning experience, but we're going full steam ahead.
Well, that's pretty cool. And I was just thinking as we were watching the presentation, how these sketches would lend themselves extraordinarily well to a graphic novel, which is all the rage with the youth these days. So maybe that's one option.
Yeah.
Uh, Adrienne, Allie, thank you very much. This was fascinating. We look forward to the launch of the project, and thanks very much for sharing the early access part of it with us today.
Thank you
Thank you
for
for having
having
us.
us.
All right,
Thanks.
folks, that concludes the spring term of the Digital Coffee House. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you in the fall.